Thank you for choosing the Laguna PL1220 as your laser machine. In this video, we will show you how to do a mirror beam alignment, and it will include adjusting the mirrors and setting the jog speed and adjusting lens focus, and we'll run a test program. Now, during the shipping process to your location, there are a number of ways a laser machine can fall out of proper factory alignment. Before using your new PL1220, you must perform a mirror alignment procedure to make sure you get the optimal performance from your new laser machine. All of our laser machines are aligned before leaving our facility, but we can't control the road conditions that your machine may endure as it's being delivered. So there's some really rough roads out there, and this is probably the number one reason the sensitive mirror and beam adjustments on your new PL1220 may need an alignment when it arrives. Let's take a look at the basic elements we will be adjusting in this alignment. First off, we have our CO2 laser tube, which fires a beam, and that hits mirror number 1 and is directed over to number 2. And that beam then is directed into mirror number 3, and finally straight down through the focal lens. Now, mirror number 1 is in a fixed position on the machine, and mirror number 2 is fixed to the gantry and moves with the gantry, and mirror number 3 also moves with the gantry. Now, our first task is to make sure that the laser beam is aligned directly into the center of mirror number 1. And the laser tube is the most common part to become misaligned during shipping. So we'll start this process by leveling the machine on its base so we have a consistent surface area. We'll level all the sides of the machine and use the adjustable feet to ensure that we have an accurate surface level. If you need to make any adjustments, go ahead and lift the machine up, put a block in there, and then just use the leveling feet to give you a perfect level. Now let's manually set a comfortable jog speed to help with the mirror alignment process. As you can see here, our speed says we're at 30 millimeters per second, and if you press that speed button, you'll see it highlight there and give us an adjustment where we can use the right or left toggle arrows, or we could use up or down to set speed. But right now, let's just see what this does at 30 millimeters per second. As you can see, as I jog the machine in either direction, it's going fairly slow, and we may want to adjust that to a little bit higher speed. And so let's see how we do that. So basically, it's very simple. You just press the speed button again, and that will highlight the speed there. And then you can move the little cursor over into various positions, and then use your up or down key to set a value. So there's an up or down. We're at 330 millimeters per second right now. Hit enter to save that speed. And now you can see where that that's pretty zippy. Okay, so this might be a little bit too fast for working with manual speed control. So let's lower that speed down to something more reasonable, like say, let's go from 2 to 1. Let's go up, maybe set that at about 90 millimeters per second. And that seems to be a comfortable speed. So let's see what that looks like now. So we'll go ahead and jog over and jog back. And that looks like a fairly reasonable speed to do manual adjustments with. So, yeah. All right. Now it's time to take off the sides of the machine so that we can access the mirrors inside and do our adjustments. So go ahead and take the screws off, and they'll probably drop down into this little basin there on the lip. And now we can have access to mirror number 2, which is right into that spot there. So mirror 2 will look something like this, and we'll now want to take off the back as well. So use the same method, just undo the screws, put them in a safe place, and then just remove the little exhaust hose there, and lay that panel down. And now we have mirror 1 access point right there. So it'll look something like this, and it's very close to the head of the laser tube. So now we can place roughly a 2" by 2" acrylic piece in front of that tube and in front of the mirror. There's a little ledge there that it'll sit on, and just sort of align it so that the acrylic covers the mirror. And then what we'll do is just do a simple pulse by pushing down on the pulse button, and it'll fire a pulse. And as you can see here, the pulse mark looks like this, and it should hit the center of the mirror. So we're quite a bit off at this point. So in this case, I will just do I'll pull back on this laser tube, and this is a common problem that happens in transit, that these can get jostled out of alignment a little bit. So really, to fix this, all you have to do is maybe pull back on that little tube. And we'll go ahead and hit the pulse button again, and in this case it's perfect. So no other adjustments needed there. So now we can go on with selecting that beam and working with mirror number 1. And we want to loosen up all of the set screws first, and once we do that, we can start making our adjustments. And you'll want to remember to tighten these screws when you finish doing your adjustments. So let's do this. Let's take a look at the alignment of the beam and how this works. The laser beam is going to be directed into mirror number 2, which has a close position and a far position. And we can adjust that beam up or down with this top screw. So let's take a closer look. If we turn the top knob clockwise, it will direct the beam downward. And likewise, if we turn that screw counterclockwise, it'll direct the beam upward. Okay, so in this case, if you want to adjust the beam to the right or the left, you can use either of these bottom screws. So we'll be using the one on the right hand side of that mirror number 1 to direct the beam into mirror number 2. So technically you can use either of those screws on the bottom to adjust right or left. Okay, now the one thing you want to be aware of is that you can see where the beam is moving to the right or the left, and that's just based on whether or not the beam should be more to the right or the left. So the goal is to center the beam at both near and far positions, and as you can see here, the beam is hitting the mirror in the closest position, but when it moves back on the gantry to the farthest position, it's completely missing the mirror. So what we want to do is make sure that that beam is directed as close to the center as possible in both of those positions. So we'll start with the close position. So go ahead and jog mirror 2 into the access position. All right, and then we can reuse the acrylic piece that we tested the beam with from the tube, and we'll just turn it upside down, and I put some tape on it to keep it in place while jogging it back and forth. So let's move the gantry to the very front right side of the 1220, and we'll refer to this as the far position. And go ahead and hit the pulse button once, and we'll see that it fires the pulse right up there, and that's where it's landing on our acrylic. And let's go back to the front of the machine. We'll bring this gantry all the way to the rear right of the machine and hit the pulse button again, and then move it back into our access position so we can see what's happening there. So you can see the pulse mark in the far position is up there on the top, and then the near position is a little lower, and our target is in the middle. So we need to redirect the beam downward to the left. So we'll jog the gantry to about the middle position, somewhere close to the middle position, and we'll turn this top knob clockwise to direct that beam downward. And in this case, I'll give the top screw there 4 little clockwise turns, and then we'll do a pulse test. And there it is, and you can see that the beam is hitting just a little bit below again, so that's good. It's a little bit lower. We're going to do the same thing. We're going to make a couple of little small turns. We'll do a little, about 7 more little tiny turns on that top knob, and just incrementally move it down a little bit at a time. And that pulse puts it right about in the middle. So we can see where it's off. We need to bring it over. And in order to do that, we're going to use this lower right screw, and we're going to turn it clockwise. And if needed, we can turn it counterclockwise to make it move that way, but a clockwise turn should be good for this. So we'll do the same thing there. Let's just go ahead and do about 5 little clockwise turns on that one and do a pulse test. And you can see where that pulse is hitting a little more toward the center, which is good. And we'll just keep working it over in the same manner. It's very simple to do. Just give it a couple turns. Do another pulse test. And there it is. It goes into the center a little more. So we need to keep going. So we'll just keep on adjusting that screw. Just give it some more turns there, about 4 other little ones. And you're not making large turns on this. Basically, they're just very small little turns, and you'll just sort of dial that in so that it hits the very center. So we'll do about 4 more little clockwise turns and do another pulse test. And there it is. It's just about in the center. We'll go ahead and move this to the far position and then take another pulse test, or make an adjustment first. In this case, I decided to just go ahead and make a little adjustment on this by giving 3 more little turns to that clockwise, and then hit the pulse, and there it is. So that looks really perfect. Okay, so now what we can do is we can concentrate on sending that beam from mirror 2 into mirror number 3. So we'll place a fresh piece of acrylic on the nozzle head assembly there, and we'll be working with mirror number 2 now. So let's go ahead and move that nozzle to the very rear right of the machine and do a pulse test. And you won't be able to see this one because the mirror is sort of in a position where you can't see it. So we'll go ahead and do the pulse. I can see it's landed there onto the mirror. And now we'll do a pulse test with it in the very far position over here. And there it is. And we can see that these are off. Okay, so the near position is in the middle, and the far position is, a little bit out. So let's work with it in the far position. And we'll go ahead and do the same thing. Give the bottom right screw about 3 little clockwise turns to direct that beam a little more toward the center. So we'll give that some turns. And we'll do another pulse test. And it's hitting just a little closer. So we may have to repeat that same thing by just giving it a couple of more turns. So let's go ahead and give that screw a couple little turns. And in this case, I'll turn the top screw a little bit counterclockwise by just 1 little turn, just to direct it upward a little more. So we'll go in and see where that one falls. So there it is. Okay, so this looks pretty good. We're in roughly the center of the mirror. And remember, this doesn't always have to be just entirely perfect. As long as it's in the close proximity to the center. And now what we can do is we can check the alignment on the beam as it's going downward. But we'll need some extra height because we need to take off the nozzle assembly. So a couple of 2x4s work pretty good for this. If you just slide some in there, and this will give us enough room to take off that nozzle and lens assembly. So let's go ahead and just remove the lens and the retaining nut. So we'll take that off, and then take off this retaining nut. And in this case, we're going to use some tape. in this case, to sort of see where that is hitting. This is the easiest way to do it, is just to attach a piece at the bottom and then mark the tape with some sort of indicator so that you're kind of aware of its orientation. And you don't even really have to mark this tape up like this. Sometimes you can just use the indentation made in the tape as you press it up against there. I'm doing this just to give you kind of an idea of what, where we're at, so you can visually see it a little better. Okay, so now that we have it marked, we'll go ahead and do a pulse test and sort of check out where that is landing. We want to center it, and in this case it looks like it's slightly off center, and you can see right there we'll need to do a few adjustments. When it's off center like this, it can cause a slight beveling in the edges of a material that you're cutting. So I'll start with one little counterclockwise turn up here, and I'll put some tape on there. We'll mark it up again, and then we'll do a quick pulse test, and there it is. And I can see the pulse. The longer you hold the pulse down, the more it fires. For the longer it fires. This was just a small fire, so it didn't burn all the way through, but we're still off a little bit. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a few more adjustments on here. And there's no real exact method to doing this. Every alignment's going to be slightly different, so it might take a little bit of experimentation as you go through this process. But it's very easy, so just sort of work with it slowly. Just make adjustments, real small adjustments, and yeah, you'll get a pretty good idea of what's going on after you turn these knobs a little bit. So I'm going to do an adjustment here, a small clockwise turn on this bottom one, and a little counterclockwise on the top left, and on the top right I'll also do the same. I think I'll do just a slight bit counterclockwise, and we'll see where that falls. So it's looking better. And I'm going to just sort of go through here and do a rapid series of just small incremental pulse tests, making very, very small adjustments, a couple of turns here and there on the bottom mirror, and eventually you'll get it to land directly in the middle. And the next thing we want to do is we'll do the same test for the bottom of the nozzle and the lens. And so we'll remove the lens and insert it back into the assembly by just putting it back in there. Make sure you put your retainer ring on, and we'll put it right back up in there and leave it in a long position, so the further down, leave as much tube as you can, and that'll give us a really good idea of where it's hitting the lens and if it's hitting it directly in the center. So I'll go through the same process, mark up some tape, and we'll do a couple of pulse tests and maybe some minor adjustments. And there's that one. Let's see, we got it's fairly good. Might be off just a tiny bit, so we'll go ahead and make a small adjustment. I'll turn this bottom one and push that mirror out a little bit. Do another pulse test. And that one looks perfect, very much in the center, and that tells me that the lens is focusing that directly to like the center of that nozzle. And centering the beam will give you the most precise cuts and help give you very straight cut edges without beveling or inconsistencies from side to side. So now's a good time to tighten up all your set screws on each mirror, and make sure they're tightened on each mirror, number 1, number 2, and number 3. And we can get on with reassembling the nozzle and the lens. So go ahead and screw your lens back onto that nozzle, and we'll put that back up into the assembly, and make sure that you leave it in the high position. Push it up real far up there, because you don't want it to hit the table when we when we move these 2x4s out of the way. Okay, so once those are gone, we're just about ready to run our first QC test. So I'll jog the head over into the center, kind of jog it into the center there. And then we can place our material, in this case a small piece of acrylic, kind of right under the nozzle there. And I'll use a 7mm depth gauge to set the focal distance. That seems to be a really good distance to work with as far as keeping the beam away from your material. And then I'll just hit escape a few times, and we'll go ahead and hit our file button, and we'll choose that Laguna QC CO2 test, and I'll hit enter, and I'll go ahead and hit the frame, and let's see where it frames out. It looks pretty good. I might make a small adjustment and just move my material around. So we'll press frame again and just sort of move that material into position, and we're good to go. So the next thing is just to press the origin button, and that'll set the origin right there, and we can then we're ready to start. So let's just hit the start when we close the lid first, and remember to always have proper ventilation when you're using a laser machine. And so let's see what this QC test does. Well, it looks like everything turned out perfect with our first test cut, so it looks like we're ready to go. We've got clean edges, a nice engraving, and that's great. Well, we hope this video has been helpful for you in order to align your machine when it arrives. And you can always check out our laser section for the PL1220 on our website. Right there. And again, thanks for choosing the Laguna PL1220 as your laser machine.